Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hello online. Whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. My name is Martin O'Leary. I am the studio community lead here at the Pervasive Media Studio. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing the same old red woolly jumper that I've been wearing all winter. And every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially big welcome to those of you who are new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put their hand up? A couple of you. Hello, welcome. This bit is for you, and also anyone online who is new, and I can't see your hand up. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, the University of the West of England, the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free to our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So a few notes before we begin. Please feel free to move around, make a cup of tea, grab a glass of water from the kitchen, which is behind you. If you need to take a break at any point, there is a quiet space to my left, to your right, just through that wall there. You can pop in there. It is well soundproofed. Fire exits are at either end of the studio, and one of the studio team will direct you to them should we need them. We're hoping to not need them, but if you do, again, to my left, to your right, other end of the studio at either end, we'll send you there. There are accessible toilets and baby change in the corridor next to the kitchen. Usually I call out the baby change, but today I'm going to call out that Watershed was awarded Loo of the Year at the Toilet Awards last night. So, you know, big up the shed. I think
it wasn't actually Loo of the Year, but we did get an award.
Okay, I'm sorry. We did not win the big award. I believe it was Best Loo in England or something similar. Thank you. Best toilet in an independent venue in England. It's still a pretty good toilet. I would suggest, taking a visit. It's not actually these toilets. It's the customer toilets at the other end of the building. Anyway. That's enough about that. There will be a Q&A at the end of the talk. For those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Tony will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, you can raise your hand and we'll send around a microphone, old-fashioned way. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at PM Studio UK on Twitter, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. Right. Our speaker for today is Oma Keeling. Oma is an artist, writer, and the editor of Container magazine. They're going to be talking about some work they've been doing with the writer Morgan Jennings, a research project exploring nuclear history in the north of England, radiation and illness in video games, and the potentials of destruction in science fiction. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Oma.
Thank you for clapping. Gonna go on my phone. I'm a young person, sorry. I'm looking up my words. Morgan is maybe watching, I don't know, I've not gotten communication, but I will be speaking for her. Grand, she is cool. And she's also written some words and I'll be reading them. First off, I want to do a thing where I do, right. Is there anybody who would like to say one word? I'll pick, who is that? You, great. I'm going to ask a question and you're going to say the word uncertainty, okay? And you're going to pretend like that's your actual answer to the question I'm asking. Yeah. Okay, now we start the talk, sponsored by Diet Coke. Not true, that's not true, that's actually illegal to do that, so, yeah. Okay, cool. Right, what does nuclear power conjure in your mind?
Uncertainty.
Uncertainty, wow. Thanks. Yeah, that's exactly the same as what word that I would come up with if I were to answer that question, actually. So that's it's pretty funny. Now, me and Morgan, I'll give you some background on what I'm doing here. What is this project about? What is the project? No, what is the project about? This that I'm going to present to you is a project for me about precarity. For Morgan, it's about translating ambient dread. For me, it's about being on the edge of disaster. For Morgan, it's about background radiation. For me, it's about the actual occurrence of disaster and how that gets translated into art and capital and commerce and what that tells us about fear. For Morgan, it's about translating that ambient dread and background radiation, things I already said, into something more concrete and tangible, and challenging the existing popular culture or popular cultural vocabulary of nuclear disaster in video games. One of Geiger clicks and green goo and dying instantly. Video games were born in the crucible of peak nuclear terror and have radiation suffused into their DNA. Yet the depiction of this radiation is barely different to any other hazard that comes up in a video game format. So why does a river of radioactive sludge have the same effect as a turtle shell in Mario Kart? Here's how we got to this thought machine. And it's a version of events. They maybe did happen or maybe didn't happen. It's all in the same way that I'm going to present to you. That's for you to decide. But they're kind of real. Late in 2023, I read a story about a site in the northwest of England that was the most dangerous site in Europe. And suddenly, my brain was like, what? Awesome. A pit of hell. I joked about sending Morgan there. Morgan, who had created a piece for us with Container Magazine, who works out of Pervasive Media Studio, had created a piece for us about a power plant in the northwest, Fiddler's Ferry, a coal-powered power station that had the cooling towers have just been demolished, were demolished in December, just after she'd written this piece. This was a continuation of her work originating in Dungeness, site of Derek Jarman's house, the much more famous than me British artist, and the Dungeness nuclear power plant. Now Morgan says, something that engaging with these projects had made clear to her was how our world feels designed to obfuscate, to promote ways of always moving forward and never looking back. Visiting her parents over Christmas, they took a walk over Birkrigg Common, which is an area of limestone countryside outside Ulverston, which is in the northwest. Just off the beaten path, you can find a Bronze Age stone circle, and across the bay, there's a nuclear power plant. Both are as easy as each other to just walk past. Morgan says, I find myself attracted to these places, ones where even names are tools to obscure. The plant at Sellafield, which is the name of the pit of hell that I just talked about earlier, is only referred to as such after decades of spills and a disastrous fire under the name Windscale. Now, when Morgan said, my family actually lives right up near Sellafield, my eyes lit up because, like in any joke, the kernel of truth was there about wanting to ask questions and wanting to send somebody there. So we started discussing this idea vaguely, and then a call for, gonna slow that one down. Then a call for work that we are also applying to about critically investigating video games then emerges from the Baltic in Gateshead in the northeast and its Northern University collaborators. And that had me thinking about video games and nuclear power plants. I'm a video game developer. We're all like this. That's not true. And me and Morgan have both written a lot of words about video games in our times as critics and fans and so on. I proposed an idea about games being fixated on the fantasy of nuclear disaster and how that actually crops up in the real world, what is being said and what is not being said. Now Morgan says here, games struggle to deal with the long-term consequences for actions. Peppered through the Chernobyl disaster are dozens of stories of people making minute decisions, kicking a piece of graphite, opening a hatch, drinking a handful of water that would have devastating long-term consequences for them. Many of these stories end in death, but it isn't a death that comes swiftly, or at least it's not in a black screen or a game over. Perhaps this project is about teaching. No, that's not true. I said that sentence wrong. I added a bit that wasn't written down. Perhaps this, the last thing I said, where video games kill you instantly, is about teaching, communicating to players what to do and not do with immediate rewards and punishments. There are exceptions. The game Hellblade, Senua's something.
Sacrifice.
Thank you. Senua's Sacrifice promised that it would delete your save file if Senua's dark rot reached her head, and this would happen over several hours, the whole experience. But even though it turned out to be an empty threat, it was enough for certain gamers to label it anti-consumer, not fitting the consumer idea of how a video game deals with death. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare from the mid-2000s contains the most visited virtual recreation of a nuclear disaster site, but its version of Pripyat feels like mirrored set dressing, a maudlin magical realist. Details of children are crying are added, deafened by the thunder of machine guns. The danger of radiation is used as an invisible wall to keep you locked into one area of the map. This is how specifically we got drawn to the site of Chernobyl in fiction, in video games, as a fantasy, a theme park of disaster. And then from there, we dove the two of us into a game of just finding information along these lines, these emerging threads of nuclear horror and fear, and playing games of strings with words and phrases and similarities that were occurring throughout history. Being drawn across the country to the Hartlepool nuclear reactor, which is in the northeast, from which you can draw an almost horizontal line from that site to Sellafield, the site in the north. East-west. Adjacent to this, I'd been trying to remember a detail from my scant knowledge of the Bible about a meteor, a star, an angel that would come and initiate the reckoning. I'd had this word, woodworm, and Googled something like worm, and eventually Googled it to find Wormwood. There on the Wikipedia page, I see that Wormwood is a translation of Chernobyl. Wormwood is also a plant. It's the origin, it's the plant used to make absinthe. Alongside another, it's actually a bunch of plants, but that's one of them. We also find that sea wormwood, another plant, is at Threat in the northeast, and the spot that it grows in is just outside Hartlepool nuclear power plant. The sandy marshes outside that plant. It felt kind of like a mild haunting of just going, this word keeps coming up and following us around, but creating your own kind of ghost. And then we thought that was interesting enough to do something with it. Now, if you wanted to explore all this material, all these ideas, we wanted a site to be able to do so in, and kind of the volatility and security around real sites kind of encourages the creation of fiction for us because we don't want to get arrested. That's really why. We made up a nuclear plant instead. And we wanted to think about how would the UK, if there was such a kind of fictional, like this disaster that is in the background of fictions and real history, how would the UK be portrayed in a game that then 20 years on is based on a nuclear meltdown in the northeast, northwest, central north? So where does that meltdown occur? Wormwood is the name of the place we came up with. Where is Wormwood? That's somewhere in the middle between Sellafield and Hartlepool, and in the middle is the North Pennines. And that's something that we are creating collaboratively as a digital space. Woo! In our writing, our design of spaces, and in planning an exploration video game around an exclusionary zone in the north of England. I'm going to take a little break from talking for a second. Does anyone have any questions? It's fine if you don't. I'm just getting exhausted from talking. Ooh.
For your video game dance.
Yeah, I should dance again. That was pretty funny. All right, back to it. Morgan writes, the world's first full-scale commercial nuclear power station, Calder Hall, was built in Cumbria. Though it and the more infamous Sellafield have been variously decommissioned and based on working on different nuclear projects, 3 of the 5 remaining nuclear power plants in the UK are in Scotland, and the north of England, with another so-called clean energy hub planned for the construction around Sellafield. The northern powerhouse is nuclear, and all of Britain's nuclear disasters have been allowed to occur in the half abandoned by the Tories and Labour alike. And even when these plans are cancelled or decommissioned, they will remain as monuments, whether to bureaucratic inertia or endless forever capitalist expansion is up for debate. Wormwood, this thing we're making, will be a different kind of monument. So that's a brief background of twisting about how we ended up here and how I ended up standing here talking to you. And I wanted to point your eye to a couple of case studies that have been important guiding our ideas. And then I write, heading to this bit, case studies, sites of layering. Stalker 2, Chernobyl and the invasion of Ukraine. Morgan writes, Stalker, Shadow of Chernobyl, 2007, is a game that adapts Boris and Arkady Strugatsky's 1971 novel, Roadside Picnic, but replaces their fears there of an alien encounter with a fear of radiation. In the fiction of Stalker, several labs were set up in the exclusion zone following the 1986 disaster, eventually resulting in an even greater catastrophe in 2006 and the birth of The Zone. This area of anomalies and surreal flora is one of the few binding elements across the novel. The Tarkovsky film of the name Stalker, based on the book, and the video game, as well as the role of the stalker, desperate explorers of this wasteland, a role that translates well into the game's survival RPG mechanics. The game has a devoted cult following, inspiring fan films, conventions, and hundreds of mods that seek to render the exclusion zone an even more unpleasant and excruciating place to navigate. That fandom has stranger fringes. At the beginning of Serhii Pluggy's history of Chernobyl, he describes visiting the exclusion zone with a tour group. 4 of the 8 members of the group visited thanks to the influence of Stalker. The Russian invasion of Ukraine not only thrust nuclear power back into an intense debate with the capture of Chernobyl, but also forced the developers of the new Stalker game, Stalker 2, The Heart of Chernobyl, who are GSC Game World in Ukraine, to evacuate the country. One of their team, Volodymyr Yezkov, was killed in the invasion. This layering of events, historical and the fiction of the game, is a recontextualization of Roadside Picnic as the Chernobyl exclusion zone. And that was always, the book Roadside Picnic was always a political statement, and now it has these layers of potency kind of folded back on itself. The second case study is Half-Life. This is something I've written, and the real Black Mesa. Half-Life is a 1998 first-person shooter game that takes place around a scientific accident involving a strange material and its aftermath as alien life enters from another dimension, and a brutal military campaign of crackdown and coercion begins on both human and alien sides. The site of the originary incident of this is Black Mesa Research Facility, a sprawling underground science base underneath the desert of New Mexico. The introduction of the game sees you enter this labyrinthine base and encounter leaks of nuclear material, fears about a potential disaster, and broken equipment that echoes associations with the cultural legacy of nuclear meltdown. Black Mesa, via the game's massive popularity, has become synonymous with this fiction, even becoming the title of a long-running fan remake of the game. This is a fact that perhaps obfuscates another history, that of the people native to Black Mesa in kind of colonized America, and how, having their land taken from them repeatedly by the United States, the Navajo and Hopi people also became the target of energy companies, Peabody Coal being the main one, that opened up a coal and uranium mines in the 1960s. The coal mine and its power station, which had been enacting ecological and anti-indigenous violence, was ran from the 1960s up until 2019. This legacy of American violence in the name of nuclear and fossil fuel energy, however, is obfuscated when you search online for Black Mesa, and are directed towards the commercial success of a video game about fictional American paranoias. Now, it's those types of layered stories that end up guiding this work for me. And what have I written here? Yeah. In a time of turbulence, convince me of the importance of making stuff in order to uncover and layer and assemble new images, new realities, in response to ones that seem to be falling apart, and in response to our fears. To use fear in a generative fashion, as in science fiction often, these are stories in which we represent things we face now in ways that make them fit into our lives differently. This work that I associate the thing that we're doing with is not always in the mode of resolving crisis. Most often it's not, or any crisis that you might imagine. Rather, it's a place of holding feelings about living in the world. A collage that permits trauma to exist in conversation with a host of other things. And I think that's all the stuff I've got written down. we've not. We've got one or two images so far created in the kind of digital collage world of Wormwood. Those are one of those you've probably seen in advertising for this talk, but otherwise it kind of exists as just something we have written about. Is there any questions? Because yeah, it's about 1:30.
Has anyone got any questions?
Yeah, so I helped build Dungeness.
Really?
We know we had this chat earlier, and I'm part of the team cleaning up Sellafield, and so I got some identification with this. I was just interested in how you think about representing radiation. See, because it's easy to sort of represent in a game, I imagine, a radioactive object as like a glowing or a hot thing. But of course, radiation isn't, just like heat. It's all around you, pervasive. It's sometimes higher, sometimes lower, sometimes deadly, sometimes trivial. But it's like an invisible mist. So I wondered how you thought about representing radiation in a game.
Well, mainly I thought so far have been about how it's quite hard to do, and how game companies and video game designers have kind of gotten around the trickiness of it by representing it through other objects or through recording devices like a Geiger counter, that becoming kind of iconic, and so now like visually iconic in a game like Fallout, which has you attached kind of to a bodily Geiger counter that, in a world of post-apocalyptic America, the apocalypse being caused by nuclear explosions, you might encounter radiation throughout the world, and that's represented as, you're encountering +1 harm. You walk over here, +10 harm, that's happening to me now. And then you can walk away from it, but it kind of accumulates in your body. And that's, to me personally, that's like the most literal way of trying to get a more realistic representation of that harm, the danger, or of radiation. I'm not sure. I think it's an interesting artistic question, and yeah, something we want to explore.
Anyone else? Tony.
Somebody on YouTube, Summer Rains, asks, how much post-apocalypse / nuclear fiction, like this project and Stalker, do you think is influenced by fears and history around deindustrialization? There's another one.
I don't know very much about that, so I'm not going to pretend to talk about it.
One to pick up later. There is, and then somebody else asks, are you a video game developer? Do you think you'll be making a game as well as the digital collage?
Yes, I am, and yes, I do. What's could anyone give an explanation of what deindustrialization is? Because I feel very silly.
Thinking about the loss of factories and
okay, right.
livelihoods.
Yeah, I've not thought about that. Maybe. Yeah.
Anyone else? Tim.
I was really interested about your point where you said that there was a pushback against games where the death wasn't immediate.
Right.
And I was wondering if you could elaborate more on your perspective on that, both in games and and then in it was just a really interesting point. And you moved on quite quickly. I was wondering if you had any more to say on it.
I think that it was a specific point referring to Hellblade, and maybe a attempt to create a cultural pushback against that specific game. And I think that essentially, games are a medium in which a lot of expectations are encoded in, how they're approached. I don't think that's a totalizing thing. I think that's just how markets kind of, capitalize on games, is by going, you might die very quickly. So watch out, try not to die. Give me $30 to experience that. And, that the kind of, so like in any medium, like in, film or whatever, expectations being crossed, and weird people online telling you you're wrong about making an artistic decision will happen. I've got a lot of all over the place thoughts about that one. Sorry, I can't give you one concise answer, but yeah. No, thank you for your question.
Any others? Jack.
Hi, thanks. That was really interesting talk. Loads of interesting thoughts coming out of that. So my dad works at Dungeness Power Station,
Really?
And he lives on the Romney Marsh where Dungeness is.
This is the Dungeness Hyatt.
And I think one of the things that often sort of goes overlooked when people talk about Dungeness, because everyone talks about Derek Jarman and all that stuff, but for people living on Dungeness, that power station is like the major employer for that whole area. Like something insane, like 60% of like people who work there or so, is something absolutely mind-blowing when you actually look at the statistics. And I think a lot of people sort of miss the fact that like actually nuclear power in that context for the people living in that area is something mundane, like it's part of their everyday lives. It's and the fact that power station is being decommissioned and the impact that's having on like people's lives potentially, not only now but eventually further down the line of decommissioning, is something that often sort of goes unsaid. And I'm just wondering, when you're thinking about these layers of like thinking about nuclear power and the stories around it, whether that kind of element kind of goes missing sometimes, because I think the horror angle is something that's like really obvious to go with nuclear stuff, and that sort of fear of the unknown and radiation and stuff. But yeah, has that kind of element of the mundane come out in your sort of thinking about layering of these stories?
Yes, I think that it, and to go to what you've been saying there, that it's like, it's probably that's the like, not that fear isn't real, but that's the, localized reality of something often, that if outside of the space of nuclear disaster, in the actual like everyday, that's the main kind of fear. And I think that maybe the question earlier about deindustrialization has something to do with it, that these sites, when these sites are talked about, they're only talked about as spectacle. They're not. They're a hard thing to make mundane if you're going to talk about them, and that's why I was drawn to them is the spectacle around them. And like anything of spectacle, when you get close up, it's actually just about people, and that yeah, and I think that's a yeah. I think that's a it's hard to deal with. People losing their livelihood. That's not fun. That's not cool. That's not interesting. In a scary, in a like, oh, look, there's something over there that's going to kill you. It's like, no, that's going to kill you. Just is. And that's, that maybe is more scary.
I haven't got a question, but
Sure.
I just wanted to point out that I think there's an interesting relationship between this conversation and the question of how you artistically represent radiation and actually the mundanity of small amounts of radiation being all around us, and also Tim's question about harm over time as in a relationship to kind of economic decline, and might be interesting to think about those things together.
Yeah. Thank you for doing the tying work there. No, I think there's been that's the thing I would definitely like to explore more as we go on with the project.
I wanted to ask something myself, actually.
Sure.
So, in depictions of nuclear history, there's two sides to it. There's the mundane, the nuclear power, and then there is the incredible violence of nuclear weapons. And that feels like something which you've deliberately steered away from. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the choice to focus the ideas of nuclear history on this very low-key, mundane, rather than evoking the...
Yeah. It was definitely a deliberate choice on my part, and I think it's because I don't know where nuclear bombs are, and I do know where nuclear power stations are. A practical, a practical thing of where are they keeping them? Well, I do. Some of them are in Scotland, and they don't want them there. But yeah, I think also it's kind of there's such an amount of spectacle to that, to nuclear war, that has, I think, been. I think there was a documentary on BBC Two last night about nuclear disaster, and I looked and it was like, oh shit. Now they're going to think I copied. But and it's a funny thing that it comes around. So there's more. I don't know. I'm contrarian, I guess. There's another one. Another reason. Sure.
I think this one here first.
Thanks, that was a really, really good talk. I just wondered, when you spoke about Wormwood and that being a plant that's maybe endangered around Sellafield.
Around Hartlepool.
Sorry, around Hartlepool. It made me think about how, I don't know much about nuclear power stations, but I have watched the Chernobyl film or series that came out a few years ago. And I remember being really struck by how incredible the nature was there after 30 years or whatever of people not being there at all. And initially it was terrible, but then the recovery of plants and animals and things, and then it becoming a space that was really incredibly varied and full of life, just not humans. And I wondered if you'd thought about in your collage of ideas and overlaying of things, if the ironic sort of peace that comes to nature after those things might be in the mix.
Radiation sanctuary.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. I'd not thought about that, really. I think that in my kind of, there's a side of that which is kind of incredibly haunting to me. That is the I don't know. I think that's an interesting question, and I don't know what my response to it is. But no, it's a good, well, thank you for putting that thought in my head.
There's one over here.
I think this talk is this has been really, really interesting.
Thanks.
I think the game sounds really cool as well. I think it's really interesting, that idea of that you said that in a lot of games, kind of the death is quite instantaneous, or nuclear death is quite instantaneous, which kind of doesn't show the experience of actually the real passing of time and the complications that can happen over time. I'm just interested into whether when you're thinking about the game, if you already have an idea of how you want to show that passing of time or that death, or whether it's something that you're hoping will kind of come up as you're researching it more.
Yeah, I think hopefully that will come up. Well, I was thinking recently my grandma died, and that was a long, extended death, and so those kind of things that became very more real. And thinking about that is at the minute very I don't really want to think about it. So maybe it'd be something I approach later on in the project. It's been an interesting thing of researching and being the triviality of the way that games treat death like commerce. And that's the medium, or has been, the way of making money. And I don't think there's anything artistically, morally bad about that, aside from the money bit. Yeah, it's mainly the money bit that and making, expediting people's. I think it's an interesting thing of how making people live through death in art, and different ways that is utilized as a tool. So yeah, I think yeah. So yeah, I want to get there maybe a bit later on in the project. Yeah, thank you for good question.
Thank you.
Hey, again, I really like that talk. I was thinking about how kind of another presentation of radiation in games, in the Civilization series, the strategy series, where you can build radioactive plants, and they're basically part of your economy in that game, and they fuel your production of other buildings or your kind of military. Those games are often seen as kind of imperialist fantasies about establishing an empire and conquering the globe, which includes conquering other empires. I was wondering if you had any perspective on how kind of another part of that is that I think this genre lends itself well to longer form effects, so which might kind of fit well with radiation. I don't know loads about how they actually represent, the consequences of having lots of radioactive plants in your civilization. But I think that genre is trying to kind of move away from this capitalist, imperialist way of play, and I wondered what your kind of perspective on that might be, and how radiation plants might kind of be kind of economic structures that play into that. Sorry, that's quite a lot.
No, it's good. It's an interesting topic. I've not played a lot of the strategy, large-scale strategy, long-term strategy games, but I think that mainly because I find them long and quite hard to kind of grasp that way of depicting systems, and that I think it totally comes in as another way. We've got this one idea of what a video game kind of is. That is the kind of dominant way you come to a space like this and you talk about games and you think you talk about them as one thing, but there's these multiple genres that are dealing with different ways of depicting things, and I think I move up. Kind of have shunned that genre historically because I think it's boring. But I think that it's a good question and a good place to look for something like because you're thinking on you're thinking on a you're doing like mega brain, like world scale, like here's my one thing, and it's like you're doing like the work of government, or empire, and I guess I've been thinking on a very like small scale, like one person moving through the world thing. Thank you for. I guess I've not really got a constructive way to answer your question, but I think that it's like kind of about bringing in things of like things that would be important to think about. Yes.
Thank you. I'm finding it really interesting, especially all the talk around like how you represent things, how you represent radiation. The mundane parts, and actually some of the coming off kind of what some of these 2 points. For you, who do you see almost the target audience being, especially when as a kind of a consumer in the gaming world is say that all that instantaneous death and almost entertainment and escapism, when you're trying to almost it's been rooted in elements of truth. Myself and other people. I think I don't know. Whoever's interested is the good. I'm not. I think the target audiences are a weird idea. Not to dismiss your question, but I think that the kind of like that's the. Like, just whoever wants to get interested in it. So I suppose kind of from that then, it's like, how do you grapple the kind of 2 ends of kind of escapism and kind of the, I'm going to come back to the death thing, kind of people wanting the immediacy and the kind of, the glorified, I don't want to say glorified, but you know what I mean, in terms of nuclear versus that truth, and how do you tackle that in terms of thinking going forward?
I don't know. I think that's like it's a question about like who.
I suppose it's about your, as you say, if you're the audience, like your own passions versus kind of what an end goal is.
I think of this kind of like how I would make a horror movie.
Yeah.
Like, I like horror movies a lot. And I like what they do with this kind of like, with fear. And I'm aware there's a moral argument about that's not really a good idea. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you make a nice movie where nothing bad happens? So I think that's something I guess I kind of think about with that. Like, I don't know. We'll see.
Any last questions? Yeah, one more.
I think
just one more. So, because I think there's another interesting angle to this, and that's that designing video games and playing video games allows you to literally play at things that would take you years to build. So if you're trying to build, I don't know, I used to design control rooms, but it took us 5 years to build. That's the way it was. But we grew up in the world of Star Trek, and the first time we walked into the control room we designed, it looked bloody like the Starship Enterprise. And it really did, and it really struck us. So we'd sort of drawn our ideas of what a modern thing looked like and how it would work from watching Star Trek. Star Trek was built on old battleship bridge layouts and communications and signing off your things. There's this interesting interplay, and I think some of the ways if you're thinking of how do we communicate, how do we perceive risk, and how do we understand radiation, how to react to it, how do we visualize it on a display or something, that's where the next generation of people who do it for real also get their ideas from.
Yeah.
You can play, and real life can pick what works best, and then that can feed back. It happens. So there you go.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to leave it. Yeah. I've not got an insight that I can play back to you, but I think that's a good place to leave it with you bringing your actual knowledge about it to it. No, thank you very much, and thank you everyone who's listened to me ramble on and dance around. So, cheers.
And thank you, Oma. All right, everybody, before you go, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team. Studio team, can you give us a wave? Danielle's there. Tony's in the back not paying attention. Joe's over there somewhere. We'll be happy to help. If you're watching online, please drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again next week.